The radio crackled across Kandahar airfield at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. The voice was clipped, urgent, stripped of everything except necessity. Any Apache pilot on base. We need immediate CAS, troops in contact, grid November Tango 7428. Multiple casualties. Time now. The operations center went silent. Controllers exchanged glances across the dim glow of their monitors. Outside, the flight line sat empty, rotors still, gunships dark. The main combat aviation brigade had lifted off 6 hours earlier for a coordinated strike package near Helmand. What remained on base were support personnel, administrative staff, and a skeleton crew of maintainers keeping equipment breathing. The radio operator keyed up again, slower this time, the urgency bleeding into something closer to resignation. Any Apache pilot on base? Nothing. Then from the back of the ready room, near the coffee station that never stopped brewing, a hand went up. Not sharp, not confident, just up. Slow, deliberate, like someone volunteering for something they knew would cost them. Everyone turned. The man standing there wore a stained flight suit with sleeves rolled to the elbows, grease smeared across one forearm, a torque wrench still hanging from his belt. His name tape read Crew Chief Alvarez. His eyes, however, told a different story. They weren't the eyes of a mechanic. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the world from 4,000 feet, who had put ordnance on target while rounds pinged off composite armor, who had brought crews home on fumes and prayers. "I'll fly," he said. The room erupted, not with relief, with confusion. A captain from logistics stood, shaking his head. "You're a maintainer, Alvarez. We need a pilot." "I am a pilot," Alvarez said, voice flat, unapologetic. "Warrant Officer Julia Alvarez. 5 deployments, 1,800 flight hours, ATP rated. I just worked the line now." The operations officer, a major who had been 3 days in country, blinked. "Why the hell are you turning wrenches if you're rated?" Alvarez didn't answer immediately. She crossed the room, pulled a battered helmet bag from a locker that looked like it hadn't been opened in months, and checked the contents. Visor, gloves, kneeboard with cards still tucked inside. She looked up at the major, her expression unreadable. "Because nobody asks mechanics to fly." She slung the bag over her shoulder and walked toward the door. Behind her, someone finally moved. The duty officer grabbed a headset. "Spin up Dealer 26. Get her a co-pilot and a crew chief. Now." Alvarez didn't wait for confirmation. She was already gone, boots echoing down the hall toward the flight line, toward the machine that had once been hers, toward a fight that couldn't wait for anyone else. The night air tasted like dust and jet fuel. Alvarez moved through it like a ghost, muscle memory guiding her past sandbag revetments and tie-down chains. Dealer 26 sat in the shadows, an AH-64D Apache longbow, her tandem cockpit glass reflecting the distant runway lights. Alvarez ran her hand along the fuselage, fingers tracing the panel lines she had torqued down 100 times. She knew every rivet, every access door, every place this bird carried its scars. A voice called out from behind. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Oakes. They said you need a front-seater." He was young, fresh-faced, probably 2 months out of flight school. His uniform still had crisp lines. Alvarez turned, sized him up in a glance. "You current on the Charlie model. Delta, ma'am. I haven't flown the Charlie since." "This is a Delta," she pointed to the radar dome. "Longbow, you'll handle sensors and weapons. I'll fly. Don't overthink it." Oakes nodded, uncertain but willing. Behind him came Staff Sergeant Keogh, crew chief, already hauling ammo cans toward the pylon stations. "Crew Chief Keogh, ma'am. I'll have her uploaded in 8 minutes. "Make it 6, Alvarez said. She climbed the side of the aircraft, settled into the rear cockpit, the pilot's seat. Her hands found the controls without thought, collective cyclic pedals. She adjusted the seat, pulled the harness tight across her shoulders, and began the pre-flight flow from memory. Batteries on. Inverters check. Hydraulic pressure building. The aircraft woke beneath her, systems humming to life, displays flickering green. Oakes climbed into the front seat, fumbling slightly with his harness. "Ma'am, can I ask why you're not on the flight roster?" Alvarez didn't look up from the startup checklist. "Long story. We've got 6 minutes." She paused, hands hovering over the engine start panel. Outside, Keogh was slamming a rocket pod into place, his movements efficient and violent. I put a bird down hard 2 years ago. Hydraulics failure over Cunnar. My co-pilot didn't make it. I walked away. Army decided I needed time. Time turned into a desk. Desk turned into a toolbox. She flipped the APU switch. The auxiliary power unit whined to life. Nobody puts you back in the seat when they think you're broken. Oakes was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Are you?" Alvarez keyed the intercom. "Start 1. The first turbine began to spool, the sound building from a whisper to a roar. The rotors twitched, then began their slow rotation, picking up speed, cutting the air into rhythmic pulses. She felt the airframe shudder, felt it remember what it was built for. "I'm here, aren't I?" she said. The engine gauges climbed into the green. "Start 2. The second turbine caught, and the Apache became something alive, something hungry. Keogh gave a thumbs up from the ground, stepped clear. Alvarez keyed the tower frequency. Kandahar Tower, Dealer 26, request immediate departure, combat mission, souls on board 2. The controller's voice came back without hesitation. Dealer 26 cleared for takeoff, runway 23, winds calm, altimeter 3012. Good hunting. Alvarez pulled collective, felt the skids lift, felt the weight fall away. The Apache rose into the darkness, nose dipping forward as she transitioned to forward flight, the desert falling away beneath them in a blur of shadows and distant lights. They flew low, hugging the terrain, the Apache's shadow racing across moonlit wadis and ridgelines. Alvarez kept her scan constant, altitude, airspeed, engine temps, threat display, everything nominal, everything green. But her chest felt tight. It had been 743 days since she had last pulled collective in combat. 743 days since she had felt this particular cocktail of adrenaline and focus and fear. Dealer 26, this is Chaos 16, how copy? The voice on the radio was strained, punctuated by the flat crack of gunfire in the background. Chaos 16, Dealer copies Lima Charlie, inbound your pose 2 minutes, Alvarez replied. Her voice was steady, clinical. Grid November Tango 7428, confirm. Confirmed. We're pinned down northeast side of the village, taking fire from multiple structures, RPGs and small arms. We've got 2 urgent surgical, can't move them. Alvarez pulled up the moving map display, cross-referenced the grid. The village was a tight cluster of compounds, mud walls and narrow alleys, exactly the kind of terrain where close air support became surgery. Chaos Dealer, I need you to mark your position. Strobe, IR, anything you've got. Roger, strobing now. In the front seat, Oakes activated the TADS targeting system, the sensor ball beneath the nose swiveling as he scanned the grid. The FLIR image painted the world in shades of white and black, heat signatures blooming like flowers. He found the strobe immediately, a pulsing star of infrared light invisible to the naked eye. Visual on friendly strobe, 11 o'clock, 1.3 clicks, Oakes said. Alvarez banked the Apache left, bleeding airspeed, transitioning into an orbit above the village. Below she could see the thermal signatures of bodies, some moving, some still. Muzzle flashes flickered from 2 buildings on the northern edge. I've got probable enemy positions, 2 structures, bearing 015 and 030 from friendly pose, Oakes reported. Stand by for laser. He lased the first building. The targeting pod locked on, range and coordinates flooding the display. Alvarez evaluated the geometry. Friendlies were less than 50 meters from the target. Danger close didn't begin to cover it. Chaos Dealer, understand your danger close. Confirm you want guns on that northern structure. Affirmed, Dealer, we need it now. We're getting chewed up down here. Alvarez exhaled slowly. She rolled the Apache onto its side, nose dropping, the world tilting into a controlled dive. Her hand eased the cyclic forward, thumb hovering over the weapon's release. The targeting pipper settled onto the building's roofline. Guns, 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 she transmitted and squeezed. The 30mm cannon roared, spitting high-explosive rounds at 625 per minute. The building exploded into dust and fire, walls collapsing inward. Alvarez pulled the Apache hard right, climbing, scanning for secondary threats. The second building lit up immediately, muzzle flashes intensifying, rounds reaching up toward them. Alvarez felt the familiar thump-thump-thump of small arms fire passing nearby, heard the faint ping of a round glancing off the armor somewhere beneath her feet. Taking fire, Oakes said, voice tight. I see it, Alvarez replied. She rolled inverted for a heartbeat, bleeding altitude, then snapped the aircraft back upright, repositioning for another gun run. The world outside the cockpit became a blur of motion and calculation. Distance, angle, closure rate, escape route, all of it processed in the space between heartbeats. Chaos dealer second gun run inbound. Copy dealer cleared hot. She lined up on the second structure, the TADS pipper glowing red on her monocle display. This building was taller, 3 stories, with a flat roof and what looked like a technical mounted on top, a heavy machine gun swiveling toward them. Vehicle on the roof, Oakes called. I see it. Alvarez didn't wait. She ripple-fired 2 Hydra rockets, the whoosh-whoosh of their launch shaking the airframe. The rockets streaked downward, white trails against the darkness, and impacted with surgical precision. The technical disintegrated, secondary explosions cooking off ammunition. The building's roof caved in. Good hits, Chaos 16 called. Fire slackening. We're moving the wounded now. Alvarez climbed back to altitude, circling, eyes scanning for additional threats. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her jaw ached from clenching. She forced herself to breathe, forced herself to stay present. Below, the thermal signatures of the ground team began to shift, moving away from the buildings, pulling back toward a clearing where a medevac could land. Dealer Chaos, you just saved our asses. We're extracting to the LZ now. Can you provide cover? Affirmed, Chaos. Dealer's got you. For the next 12 minutes, Alvarez flew a racetrack pattern above the village, the Apache sensors sweeping the terrain, hunting for anyone stupid enough to take another shot. Oakes remained silent in the front seat, his breathing audible over the intercom, quick and shallow. Finally, a new voice crackled onto the net. Dealer 26, this is Dustoff 73, inbound for pickup 2 minutes out. Dustoff dealer, LZ is cold. You're clear to land. The medevac Blackhawk came in fast and low, flared hard, and touched down in a cloud of rotor wash. Alvarez watched through the FLIR as the ground team loaded their wounded, watched the stretchers being passed up into the cabin. 30 seconds later, the Blackhawk lifted off, banked south, and disappeared into the night. Chaos 16 dealer, you're all clear, safe travels. Dealer Chaos, thank you, seriously, who the hell are you? Alvarez didn't answer. She turned the Apache west toward Kandahar and began the long flight home. Beside her, Oakes finally spoke. Ma'am, that was textbook. It was adequate, she said, but her hands were shaking now. They landed as the sun cracked the horizon, the sky bleeding pink and orange across the desert. Alvarez brought the Apache down onto the pad with the kind of precision that came from thousands of hours, the skids kissing the concrete without a bounce. She ran the shutdown checklist in silence, flipping switches, watching the needles fall back to zero. The rotors spun down, the turbines whined into stillness. The world became quiet again. Oakes climbed out first, legs unsteady, adrenaline still coursing. He stood beside the aircraft, staring at it like he was seeing it for the first time. Alvarez followed, helmet under her arm, face streaked with sweat. Keogh was already there, running his post-flight inspection, checking for damage. He found a bullet strike on the tail boom, a clean hole punched through a non-critical section. He tapped it with his knuckle, shook his head. You brought her back in one piece, he said. She did the work, Alvarez replied. A crowd had gathered near the operations building. Word traveled fast on a base this size. By the time Alvarez walked across the flight line, 50 people were watching. Some were clapping, others just stared. The major from operations was there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Warrant Officer Alvarez, he said. Sir, that was a hell of a thing you just did. I did my job, sir, the major nodded slowly. Why didn't anyone tell me we had a rated pilot working the line? Alvarez shrugged. You didn't ask. Someone in the crowd laughed. The major didn't. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. You saved 8 lives tonight, 8, you know that. I know I put ordnance on target, the guys on the ground did the rest. The major studied her for a long moment, then he extended his hand, she shook it. Report to my office at 1400, we need to talk about your assignment. Alvarez nodded, then turned and walked toward the maintenance hangar. The crowd parted for her. Some reached out, touched her shoulder, murmured thanks. She didn't acknowledge them, she just kept walking. Inside the hangar, she hung her helmet back in the locker, stripped off her gloves, and sat down on a bench. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them to stop. Oakes appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "Ma'am, yeah, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Why did you stop flying?" Alvarez looked at him, at this kid who still had the shine of someone who believed the system worked, who believed competence mattered. "Because the Army decided I was more useful fixing helicopters than flying them, because they needed maintainers, because it was easier to let me disappear than to fight for me." She stood, grabbed her toolkit from the workbench. "And because I let them." Oakes didn't respond. Alvarez walked past him, back toward the flight line, back toward the machines that never judged her, never questioned her, never forgot what she was. The operations officer's office was a plywood cube with a single window overlooking the flight line. Alvarez stood at attention in front of the major's desk, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on a point somewhere above his head. The major leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, studying her with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for after-action reports. "At ease, Alvarez," he said. She shifted her stance but didn't relax. The major sighed. "I pulled your file. You know what I found? 5 deployments, 3 air medals, 1 distinguished flying cross, 1,800 flight hours, ATP-rated instructor pilot qualified, and for the last 2 years you've been turning wrenches on the flight line." He paused. "Help me understand that." Alvarez kept her gaze level. "I had a bad landing, sir, lost a bird, lost my co-pilot. Flight surgeon grounded me pending psych eval. Eval took 6 months. By the time I was cleared, my unit had redeployed. I got reassigned to support. Nobody asked if I wanted to fly again. And you didn't push back." "I pushed, sir. I pushed for 8 months, submitted 3 requests for reassignment, all denied. After a while you stop asking." The major tapped a pen against the desk, thinking. "Your co-pilot, Captain Marcus Reed, I read the incident report, hydraulics failure. You auto-rotated into a riverbed, the airframe broke apart, he didn't make it out." "Yes, sir." "The investigation cleared you." "Mechanical failure, nothing you could have done." "Yes, sir." "But you don't believe that." Alvarez's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, what I believe doesn't matter. Captain Reed is dead. I'm not. That's the math." The major set the pen down. "The math says you saved that aircraft from a total loss. The math says you put it down in the only spot that gave you both a chance. The math says you pulled him out of the wreckage and performed CPR for 11 minutes while waiting for medevac. The math says you did everything right." Alvarez said nothing. The major stood, walked to the window, looked out at the flight line. "Last night you flew a combat mission with 0 prep time, 0 briefing, and a co-pilot you'd never met. You put ordnance on target, danger close, and brought everyone home. That's not luck, Alvarez, that's skill." He turned back to her. "I'm putting you back on the flight roster, full-time. You're too good to waste on a toolbox." Alvarez felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept locked away for 2 years. She swallowed hard. "Sir, I appreciate that, but that wasn't a request, warrant officer. Report to flight ops tomorrow at 0600. You'll be briefed on the week's mission schedule. Dismissed." Alvarez saluted, turned, and walked out. In the hallway she stopped, leaned against the wall, and exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady now. The next morning, Alvarez walked into the flight operations briefing room at 5:45 hours. The room went silent. 30 pilots, all male, all starring. She found a seat in the back, pulled out a notebook, and waited. The operations officer entered, followed by the squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel with a ranger tab and a chest full of ribbons. He scanned the room, eyes landing on Alvarez. "Gentlemen," he said, "and Warrant Officer Alvarez, welcome. Before we begin, I want to address the elephant in the room." He gestured toward Alvarez. "Some of you know her as the mechanic who's been keeping your birds flying. As of today, she's back on flight status. She'll be flying with us, and if any of you have a problem with that, my door is open." Nobody moved. The colonel nodded. "Good, let's get to work." The briefing covered the day's missions: 2 armed reconnaissance patrols, 1 escort for a logistics convoy, and 1 standby alert for troops in contact. Alvarez took notes, absorbing the details. Grid coordinates, frequencies, threat assessments. After the briefing, pilots filtered out, heading toward the flight line. A captain named Voss, a senior pilot with a reputation for being blunt, approached Alvarez. "Heard about last night," he said. "Nice shooting." "Thanks. You really put yourself down in a riverbed." "Didn't have much choice." Voss nodded slowly. "I read the report. Reed was a friend of mine, good pilot. He'd be glad you're flying again." Alvarez looked at him, surprised. Voss clapped her on the shoulder and walked out. She stood there for a moment, processing. Then she followed. On the flight line, the Apache sat in a neat row, rotors tied down, canopies gleaming in the morning sun. Alvarez walked toward Dealer 26, ran her hand along the fuselage. Keo was there, clipboard in hand, running a pre-flight inspection. "She's ready, ma'am," he said. "Everything's green." "Thanks, Keo. You flying today?" "Looks like it." Keo smiled. "Good, she flies better with you in the seat." Alvarez climbed into the cockpit, settled in, began the startup sequence. This time there was no urgency, no emergency, just the ritual of preparation. Systems check, radios check, weapons safe. The aircraft hummed to life beneath her, familiar and solid. Oakes climbed into the front seat again. "Ma'am, looks like we're paired up for the week," he said. "Guess so. I'll try not to slow you down." Alvarez smiled, just slightly. "Just don't touch anything unless I tell you to." They lifted off 10 minutes later, climbing into a sky that stretched forever, blue and endless. Alvarez felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Up here the world made sense. Up here there were no questions, no doubts, just the machine, the mission, and the sky. The patrol took them northeast, along the border region where the terrain turned rough and the villages disappeared into valleys shadowed by mountains. Alvarez flew at 2,000 feet, high enough to avoid small arms fire, low enough to maintain situational awareness. The radio chatter was sparse, routine. Below, the landscape unfolded in shades of brown and gray, ancient and indifferent. Oakes worked the sensors, scanning for threats, marking grids on the moving map. He was methodical, precise, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Alvarez appreciated that. "Dealer 26, this is Overlord. We have updated intel on possible enemy activity. Grid Papa Tango 6943 request you investigate," the TOC controller transmitted. "Dealer copies, Papa Tango 6943 investigating," Alvarez replied. She adjusted course, vectoring toward the grid. The terrain below became more rugged, ridgelines slicing across the valley floor. Oakes zoomed the TADS in, scanning compounds. Visual on the grid, one large compound, walled, possible personnel moving inside, he reported. Alvarez descended slightly, orbiting the target at a distance. "Can you get positive ID?" "Negative, too much cover. Wait, vehicle movement, northeast corner, technical with a mounted gun." "Mark it." Oakes lazed the vehicle. The range displayed 1,200 meters. Alvarez keyed the radio. "Overlord, dealer has visual on armed technical, request clearance to engage." "Dealer, Overlord, stand by." The weight stretched. Alvarez kept the Apache in a wide orbit, eyes scanning, fingers resting lightly on the controls. Below, the technical began to move, heading toward the compound's gate. "Overlord, dealer, target is moving, request expedite clearance." "Dealer, cleared hot." Alvarez didn't hesitate. She rolled the Apache into a shallow dive, lined up the shot, and fired a single Hellfire missile. The rocket streaked downward, trailing smoke, and impacted directly on the technical. The explosion was massive, secondary detonations lighting up the compound. "Good hit," Oakes said. Alvarez climbed, scanning for reactions. The compound erupted with activity, personnel scattering. Then suddenly, 3 RPGs lanced upward, trails of smoke arcing toward them. "Missiles inbound," Oakes shouted. Alvarez yanked the cyclic hard left, dumped chaff and dove. The Apache rolled, G-forces pressing her into the seat. 1 RPG passed overhead, close enough that she saw the warhead tumble through the air. Another detonated behind them, shrapnel pinging off the tail. The third missed wide. She leveled out, breathing hard. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah," Oakes said, voice shaky. "Yeah, I'm good." Alvarez climbed back to altitude, repositioned. "Overlord, dealer took RPG fire. Compound is confirmed hostile. Request additional ordnance clearance." "Dealer, cleared to sanitize the target." She made 3 more gun runs, methodically dismantling the compound's defenses. When she finished, smoke rose in thick columns and nothing moved below. They returned to base at noon, refueled, rearmed, and launched again for the convoy escort. The routine was relentless, but Alvarez welcomed it. Every flight was a chance to prove she belonged, to silence the whispers, to rebuild what had been taken from her. By the third day, the whispers stopped. Pilots started seeking her out for advice, asking about tactics, questioning her judgment on target geometry. She became a fixture in the briefing room, a steady presence. On the fourth day, Captain Voss approached her after a mission. "You ever think about going back to instructor pilot status?" he asked. Alvarez shrugged. "Haven't thought that far ahead." "You should. We need good IPs, and you're better than most of the people teaching at Rucker." "I'll think about it." That night, alone in her quarters, Alvarez sat on her bunk and stared at the photo she kept tucked in her locker. Captain Marcus Reed, smiling, helmet under his arm, standing in front of an Apache. They had been a crew for 2 years, had flown 73 combat missions together. He had trusted her completely, and she had failed him. She touched the photo lightly, then closed the locker. By the end of the week, Alvarez had flown 12 combat missions, fired 47 rockets, and expended over 900 rounds of 30mm. The squadron's kill board listed her call sign at the top, Dealer 26. The name meant something now, but the weight hadn't lifted. It never would. On Friday night, the squadron held a debrief in the operations building. The lieutenant colonel stood at the front, reviewing the week's missions. When he finished, he looked directly at Alvarez. "Warrant Officer Alvarez," he said, "your performance this week has been exemplary. You've reminded us what a senior pilot looks like. Thank you." The room erupted in applause. Alvarez nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. After the debrief, she slipped out, walked to the flight line, and sat on the revetment wall, staring at the Apache lined up in the darkness. Oakes found her there an hour later. "Ma'am, you okay?" "Yeah," she said, "just thinking." "About Captain Reed?" She looked at him, surprised. "How'd you know? You keep his photo in your locker, and you fly like someone who's got something to prove." Alvarez smiled, sad. "Maybe I do." Oakes sat down beside her. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think he'd be proud." Alvarez didn't respond. But she didn't leave either. They sat there together, watching the stars appear one by one above the desert, the night stretching out around them, vast and silent. The weeks blurred into months. Alvarez flew constantly, logging hours, stacking missions, earning back what had been taken. Her call sign became legend. Dealer 26. The mechanic who became a gunship pilot again. The one who came back. But legends are built on moments, and the moment that defined her came on a Tuesday in late July. The mission brief was straightforward. Armed reconnaissance along a suspected supply route, grid coordinates in the mountains near the Pakistan border. 4 Apache standard patrol. Alvarez was flying with Oakes again, the two of them settling into the kind of rhythm that only comes from repetition. They launched at dawn, the flight of 4 climbing into the thin mountain air, rotors chopping through the silence. The patrol was quiet for the first hour. Then the radio exploded. "Dealer 26, this is Chaos 3-1, troops in contact, grid Romeo Tango 8715. We are being overrun, say again, overrun, request immediate CAS." Alvarez didn't wait for clearance. She broke formation, pushed the cyclic forward, and dove toward the grid. The other Apache followed. "Chaos Dealer, inbound hot, 30 seconds, talk to me," Alvarez transmitted. "Dealer, we're surrounded, estimate 40+ enemy, entrenched positions. We've got wounded, can't hold much longer." The grid was a narrow valley, steep walls on both sides, a kill box. The enemy had the high ground, pouring fire down onto a platoon pinned in the open. Alvarez saw it all in the TADS. The Americans clustered behind 2 burned-out vehicles, the muzzle flashes from the ridgelines, the bodies lying still in the dirt. "Oakes, I need targets now." "Marking East Ridge, multiple positions," Oakes said, his voice clipped and focused. The laser painted the mountainside. Alvarez fired, the cannon roaring, rockets streaking out in pairs. The ridge exploded, but the fire kept coming. There were too many of them. "Dealer 26, this is Dealer 11, we'll take the West Ridge, you handle the East," Captain Voss transmitted. "Copy 11. The 4 Apache tore into the valley like avenging angels, guns hammering, rockets screaming, the air thick with smoke and cordite. Alvarez flew lower than she should have, closer than was safe, because the friendlies were out of time. Rounds pinged off the armor, cracked against the canopy. The threat warning system screamed. She ignored it. Dealer 2-6, you're taking fire, break off. Voss shouted. Negative, still engaging. She made another pass, stitching the ridgeline with cannon fire, watching enemy positions disintegrate. The friendly fire slackened. The Americans began to move. Dealer Chaos, we're moving, thank you. Alvarez climbed, scanning for additional threats. Her heart was hammering, her hands slick with sweat. The Apache's warning lights flashed red. Hydraulics, again. The hydraulic failure light glared on the caution panel, steady and unforgiving. Alvarez's stomach dropped, but her hands stayed calm. She had been here before. Oaks, we've got a hydraulic failure, primary systems offline, switching to backup, she said, voice steady. Copy, backup online, Oaks confirmed, running emergency checklists. The Apache shuddered, the controls heavier now, less responsive. Alvarez fought the cyclic, keeping the nose level. Dealer 2-6, Dealer 1-1, what's your status? Voss called. 1126, hydraulic failure, backup engaged, we're flying but it's degraded. RTB, direct route. Copy, we'll escort you back. Alvarez turned the Apache west toward Kandahar, 60 miles away. The machine felt wrong beneath her, sluggish, like it was fighting her every input. She remembered the last time, the auto-rotation, the riverbed, Reed's voice on the intercom, calm until it wasn't, the sickening crunch of the airframe breaking apart. She shook her head, forced the memory down. Not now. Ma'am, backup hydraulics are fluctuating, pressures dropping, Oaks said. How fast? Fast. Alvarez checked the gauges. He was right. The backup system was bleeding, pressure failing. They had maybe 10 minutes before the controls locked up completely. Dealer 1126, backup hydraulics failing. We need an emergency LZ now. There was a pause. Then Voss came back, his voice tight. 2-6, nearest LZ is Camp Wilson, 30 miles northwest, but that's the wrong direction. Kandahar is closer, straight west. If we lose hydraulics completely, I can't make Kandahar. Wilson's our only shot. Voss didn't argue. Copy, 2-6, turning to Wilson, hang in there. Alvarez adjusted course, flying northeast now, away from safety, toward a tiny forward operating base on the edge of nowhere. The controls grew heavier with every second. She pulled harder on the cyclic, fought the pedals, sweat running down her face. Oaks was silent in the front seat, hands hovering over the ejection handles that didn't exist in an Apache. They weren't getting out if this went bad. 15 miles out, the backup hydraulics failed completely. The controls locked. I've got no hydraulics, Alvarez said, her voice calm, clinical. We're committed. Oaks, radio Wilson, tell them we're coming in hot, emergency landing, clear the pad. Oaks keyed the radio, transmitted the call. The Apache began to descend, gravity pulling it down. Alvarez had no cyclic, no collective, only momentum, and the auto-rotation procedure burned into her muscle memory. She lowered the collective, let the rotor RPM build, trading altitude for energy. The ground rushed up, the desert floor spinning. She could see Camp Wilson ahead, a cluster of tents and Hescos. The landing pad was barely visible, a square of gravel. 500 feet, 400. The Apache was falling fast, too fast, the rotor RPM climbing into the yellow. Alvarez's hands moved without thought, adjusting the collective in tiny increments, managing the descent, bleeding off speed. 300 feet. She could see people on the ground now, scrambling, clearing the pad. 200 feet. The controls were dead weight. The Apache was a 30,000-pound glider, dropping like a stone. Oaks was praying, a quiet stream of words Alvarez couldn't make out. 100 feet. She pulled the collective up hard, flaring the nose, converting the last of the rotor energy into lift. The Apache shuddered, slowed, the descent rate dropping. 50 feet. 20. The skids hit the gravel hard, the impact jarring through the airframe. The Apache bounced once, slammed back down, and the landing gear collapsed. The nose pitched forward, the rotor blades flexing dangerously close to the tail boom. Alvarez killed the engines, pulled the fire handles. The turbines wound down. The rotors spun slower, then stopped. Silence. We're down, Alvarez said. Yeah, Oaks said, voice shaking. We're down. They sat there for a long moment, neither moving. Then Alvarez unbuckled her harness and climbed out. Her legs were unsteady, but she stayed upright. Keo would have been proud. The Apache was a wreck. The landing gear was bent, the tail boom cracked, fluid leaking from a dozen places. But it was intact, and they were alive. Captain Voss landed his Apache nearby, climbed out, and jogged over. "You okay?" "Yeah," Alvarez said. "We're good." Voss looked at the wreckage, shook his head. "That was some flying, Julia." It was the first time he had used her first name. "Just did what I had to." "No," Voss said. "You did more than that. You kept your head. You brought it down. Most pilots would have panicked." Alvarez didn't respond. She turned, looked at the broken Apache, and felt something shift inside her. The weight was still there. Reed's memory was still there, but the fear was gone. She had faced it, flown through it, and come out the other side. "We need a ride back to Kandahar," she said. Voss grinned. "I think we can arrange that." That night back on base, the squadron gathered in the operations building. The lieutenant colonel stood at the front, Alvarez beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we recognize Warrant Officer Julia Alvarez, call sign Dealer 26. Today she put an Apache down in an emergency situation with zero hydraulics. She saved her crew and brought the aircraft down intact. This is airmanship at its finest." The room erupted in applause. Alvarez stood there, uncomfortable but steady. The colonel handed her a coin, a simple thing, stamped with the squadron insignia. "For exceptional performance," he said. She took it, nodded. "Thank you, sir." The celebration continued late into the night, but Alvarez slipped away early. She walked to the flight line, to the spot where Dealer 26 had once sat, now empty, the aircraft still at Camp Wilson awaiting recovery. She looked up at the sky, at the stars scattered like diamonds across the black, and she thought of Reed, thought of the riverbed, the crash, the weight of guilt she had carried for so long. Maybe she couldn't change the past, but she could honor it. She could fly. The story spread beyond Kandahar. Word traveled through the networks, the informal channels that connected every forward operating base, every patrol base, every fire base scattered across the theater. Dealer 26, the mechanic who stepped up, the pilot who came back. Within a week, requests for Alvarez came in from other units. Ground commanders who had heard the stories wanted her overhead when their teams moved into hostile terrain. She became a known quantity, a call sign you asked for by name. The squadron commander received a message from a special forces team operating near the border. They had a high-risk mission, needed dedicated air support, and they requested Alvarez specifically. The colonel called her into his office. "You've got fans in high places," he said, sliding a mission brief across the desk. Alvarez scanned it. "Deep reconnaissance, enemy stronghold, multi-day operation. High risk, high value. They asked for me. By name, they've heard what you can do. Interested?" She looked up at him. "Yes, sir." The mission launched 72 hours later. Alvarez and Oakes, now a permanent crew, flew northeast into the mountains, linking up with a 6-man special forces team moving on foot through enemy territory. The operation lasted 4 days. Alvarez flew Overwatch, orbiting at altitude, invisible, a silent guardian. She slept in the cockpit, took shifts with the other Apache rotating in and out, and stayed on station while the team moved through the valleys below. On the third night, the team hit their objective, a compound housing a high-value target. The assault was quick, surgical, but the enemy reacted fast. Reinforcements poured in from surrounding villages, converging on the team's position. "Dealer 26, this is Sabre 11. We are heavily engaged, multiple enemy vehicles inbound, need immediate fire support," the team leader transmitted, his voice tight with controlled aggression. Alvarez had been awake for 36 hours, running on caffeine and adrenaline. She didn't hesitate. "Sabre Dealer, inbound now." She descended through the darkness, the FLIR painting the battlefield in stark white and black. 3 technicals racing toward the compound, heavy machine guns mounted, troops packed in the beds. Oakes marked the lead vehicle. Marked. Alvarez fired a Hellfire. The missile impacted, the technical disintegrating in a ball of flame. The second vehicle swerved, trying to evade. She fired again. Another hit. The third vehicle stopped, troops dismounting, scattering into the rocks. "Guns," Alvarez said, and rolled in. The 30mm cannon tore through the night, tracers arcing down, rounds impacting with brutal precision. The enemy scattered, but there was nowhere to go. She made 3 passes, methodical, relentless, until nothing moved. "Sabre Dealer, area clear, you're good to exfil." Dealer Saber, solid copy. You just saved our lives. Thank you. The team extracted under the cover of darkness, helicopters sweeping in low, pulling them out. Alvarez stayed overhead until the last man was on board, until the helicopters cleared the valley, until there was nothing left to protect. Only then did she turn west, toward base, toward the pale light of dawn breaking over the mountains. When she landed, the base was waking up. Maintenance crews moved between the aircraft, fueling, uploading ordnance, running inspections. Alvarez shut down the Apache, completed the post-flight checklist, and climbed out. Her body ached, her eyes burned, but she felt sharp, clear. Keo was waiting, clipboard in hand. "Heard you had a busy night," he said. Something like that. He walked around the Apache, inspecting. "She's holding up. Few more hours before she needs serious maintenance, but she's solid." "Good." Alvarez started walking toward the operations building, but Keo called after her. "Ma'am," she turned. "You know the guys are calling you the Guardian, right?" Alvarez frowned. "What? The Guardian? That's what they're saying. You show up, people come home, that's your thing now." She didn't know what to say. Keo grinned and went back to his inspection. In the operations center, the colonel was waiting. "The Special Forces commander called. He wanted me to pass along his thanks. Said you're the best pilot he's worked with. He's putting you in for an air medal." "That's not necessary, sir. It's already done." The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know, when I first heard about you, about what happened 2 years ago, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought maybe you'd be hesitant, Gunchy, but you're not. You're fearless." Alvarez shook her head. "I'm not fearless, sir. I'm just stubborn." The colonel laughed. "Whatever it is, keep it up. You're making a difference." She saluted and left. Outside, the sun was climbing, the heat beginning to build. Alvarez walked to her quarters, stripped off her flight suit, and collapsed onto her bunk. She was asleep in seconds. She dreamed of the sky, of Reed smiling, telling her to stop worrying so much, of the Apache, solid and dependable, carrying her through the darkness. When she woke, it was afternoon. She showered, changed, and walked to the flight line. Oakes was there, sitting on the revetment wall, staring at the Apache. "Hey," she said. He looked up. "Hey, ma'am, you get any sleep?" "Some. You?" "Couple hours." They sat in silence for a while, watching the mechanics work. "You ever think about what happens after this?" Oakes asked. "After what?" "After the deployment, after the war, what do you do then?" Alvarez thought about it. "I don't know. Fly, I guess. Teach. Help the next generation not make the mistakes I made." "You didn't make mistakes, ma'am. You did everything right." She looked at him, this kid who believed in her more than she believed in herself. "Thanks, Oakes," he nodded. They sat there until the sun set, the sky turning red and gold, the desert cooling, the world settling into the quiet rhythm of evening. And for the first time in 2 years, Alvarez felt at peace. The deployment ended 3 months later. The squadron rotated back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the trees were green and the air was thick with humidity. It felt alien after the desert, too lush, too alive. Alvarez processed out of theater with the rest of the unit, turned in her gear, and attended the mandatory reintegration briefs. She stood in formation as the division commander awarded her the Air Medal with Valor device, the bronze V gleaming on the ribbon. She accepted it with the same quiet grace she had accepted everything else, no fanfare, no speeches. Captain Voss found her afterward in the hangar watching mechanics prep an Apache for a training flight. "You heading back to the line?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'll take that instructor slot you mentioned." Voss smiled. "You'd be good at it. We'll see." He handed her a piece of paper folded. "This came for you from the Special Forces team. Thought you'd want to see it." She unfolded it. It was a photograph, the six-man team standing in front of a helicopter, helmets off, smiling. On the back, written in neat handwriting, to Dealer 26, the Guardian, "Thanks for bringing us home." Saber 11 Alvarez stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "Thanks, Voss." "Any time." He walked away, leaving her alone with the machines. 2 weeks later, Alvarez received orders. She was being reassigned to the Army Aviation Center of Excellence at Fort Nauvoo, Alabama, as an instructor pilot. She would teach the next generation of Apache pilots how to fly, how to fight, how to survive. She packed her gear, said goodbye to the squadron, and drove south. The drive took 2 days. She stopped in small towns, ate at diners, watched the landscape change from rolling hills to flat pine forests. When she arrived at Fort Novosil, she checked in, found her quarters, and reported to the schoolhouse. The building was old, institutional, filled with classrooms and simulators and the smell of floor wax. She met her supervisor, a major who had heard of her, who welcomed her with genuine respect. "We're lucky to have you, warrant officer," he said. "These students need someone who's been there, someone who can teach them what it's really like." "I'll do my best, sir. That's all we ask." Her first class started the following Monday. 30 students, all young, all eager, all terrified. She stood at the front of the room, looked at them, and saw herself 10 years ago. "My name is Warrant Officer Alvarez," she said. "Call sign Dealer 26. I've flown 1,800 combat hours in the Apache. I've been shot at, shot down, and I've made every mistake you can imagine. My job is to make sure you don't." She paused, let that sink in. "This course is hard. Some of you won't make it. But if you listen, if you work, if you stay humble, you'll walk out of here as Apache pilots, and that's worth everything." The students stared at her wide-eyed. One raised a hand. "Ma'am, is it true you used to be a mechanic?" Alvarez smiled. "Yeah, it's true." "Why'd you stop flying?" She thought about how to answer, about what these kids needed to hear. "Because I made a mistake and it cost someone their life. And I thought that meant I didn't deserve to fly anymore. But I was wrong. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do after." The room was silent. Then another hand went up. "Ma'am, how do we make sure we don't make those mistakes?" "You don't," Alvarez said. "You will make mistakes, you will fail, you will lose people, but you keep flying. You honor them by being better, by teaching others, by refusing to quit." She looked at each of them one by one. "That's what it means to be a pilot." The semester stretched ahead, long and demanding. Alvarez threw herself into it, teaching tactics, emergency procedures, judgment. She was hard on her students, uncompromising but fair. They respected her for it. One student, a young woman named Lieutenant Cara Ruiz, reminded Alvarez of herself. Quiet, focused, relentless. She stayed after class, asked questions, pushed herself harder than anyone else. One afternoon, after a simulator session, Ruiz approached Alvarez. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Sure." Do you ever doubt yourself?" "Even now," Alvarez considered the question. "Every day," Ruiz looked surprised. "Really? Really? Doubt doesn't go away, you just learn to fly through it." Ruiz nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am. For what?" "For being honest." Alvarez watched her walk away, this kid who reminded her so much of the person she used to be. And she realized something. This was why she was here, not to forget Reed, not to move on, but to make sure his death meant something. To teach the next generation to be better, to be smarter, to come home. The months turned into years. Alvarez became a fixture at the schoolhouse, a legend in her own right. Students told stories about her, about the deployment, about the emergency landing, about the guardian who never quit. She never corrected them. Let them have their legends. She knew the truth. She was just a pilot who had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. The sky was still there, waiting. And so was she.